are going to start on time. Good evening. Thank you for joining us tonight. Bonjour et bienvenue tout le monde. Epchalaji. I am Christine Saunier. I'm the director of the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives here in Nova Scotia. I am your moderator for this evening. Before we begin, I do want to acknowledge that this event is taking place here in Chebucto, in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. In making this acknowledgement, we acknowledge the ongoing oppression and struggles for justice that are facing Indigenous peoples and communities, and our need, the need to build relationships that genuinely follow in the spirit of the peace and friendship treaties. This event has been organized by 12 community organizations, so we have a lot to get through this evening. The 12 organizations are as follows: ACE, the Advocates for the Care of the Elderly; ANSUT, the Association of Nova Scotia University Teachers; Nova Scotia ACORN; my organization, the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives; the Canadian Federation of Students, Nova Scotia; the Community Society to End Poverty, Nova Scotia; Council of Canadians, Atlantic Office; Dalhousie Student Union; the Dalhousie Faculty Association; Environmental Noxiousness and Racial Inequities, or the Enrich Project; the Nova Scotia Health Coalition; and South House, Sexuality and Gender Resource Centre. The party representatives here this evening are as follows. From the Green Party, we have Casey Dillon Young, Mayor, candidate in Halifax-Chebucto. From the Liberal Party, Melinda Daye, candidate in Halifax-Needham. For the New Democratic Party, Joanne Hussey, candidate in Halifax-Fairview. From the Progressive Conservative Party, Tim Hellman, candidate in Dartmouth East. Tonight's debate will feature prepared questions selected by the host organizations. Other than the initial prompt for opening remarks, none of the candidates have seen these questions in advance. We chose questions which address inequality and unfairness in Nova Scotia. We chose questions that get really at the heart of the simple belief that not all Nova Scotians have equal access to the wealth and benefits in our province. Due to time constraints, there will not be questions from the floor this evening, but we encourage you to please speak to candidates after tonight's event, to contact parties and your local candidates to continue the conversation. We ask candidates to respect the time limits for answers, and we encourage the audience to keep applause and other reactions to a minimum. To begin, we supplied the candidates with a short question to prompt their opening remarks and frame tonight's discussion. We will begin with Casey. We have chosen the order based on alphabetical name of the political party. We will be starting with Casey and moving stage right. Beginning with Casey, and here is the question. Access to public services, economic security, and quality of life are impacted by factors such as race, gender expression, age, ability, sexuality, criminal record, where you live, and how much you make. How will your party's election commitments address structural inequities to improve fairness for Nova Scotians? And everybody has 3 minutes.
I'll start by saying that I think you're asking the wrong question, that my party's election commitments aren't what matters, that in Canada we elect individuals, not people, and that in the long term, the best thing that we can do for individuals is reform our electoral system by implementing some form of proportional representation, but we need to go further than that. We need to explore the possibility of allowing MLA recalls by constituents, of allowing petitions and legislation to be forwarded by constituents if there are enough signatures. The details need to be worked out, and my party is not about details, because our job as MLAs is not to formulate economics. We aren't economists. We are not specialists in these fields. Our job is to come up with the ideas that we get from you so that we can make everyone's lives better. But leaving that aside, we have a few policies, including a tax and dividend program, which will address structural inequality in two ways. One is that it will help our environment, and as our environment degrades, as the climate gets warmer, the people facing inequality are going to be the first ones to suffer. More than that, we need to ensure that everyone has a basic income. The truth is that the way that our economy functions right now isn't going to be the way that it functions in 10, 20 years. Artificial intelligence is rising. Our ability to make modular manufacturing is increasing. And as these things increase, workers, especially the lower class workers, are becoming more and more obsolete. And the solution isn't to fight that. It's not to say, oh, we need to save these jobs. The solution is to give people a living wage. In tandem with that, we need to raise the minimum wage. And I'm not sure if it has to be to $15 an hour within the next 4 years, or to $20 an hour within the next 10 years, because this is going to also impact small businesses, and we need to keep that in mind. I'm just going to throw some ideas out here for you. The HRP recently implemented a Start by Believing campaign. This is essential and should be implemented province-wide. The RCMP is known for flagrant abuses, and the federal government isn't doing anything to fix that. Why don't we discuss instituting our own provincial police force, one that we can regulate and control? We need to increase the sharing economy. You'll notice outside that I have a few pamphlets. These were screen printed at Radstorm, which is an amazing artist space in my constituency. Public libraries can be doing this.
Thank you. Melinda?
Thank you very much. Unlike my colleague here, good evening, everyone. Unlike my colleague here, I do believe that this question is definitely a necessary question, and I will indeed answer the question. When one considers access to public services, economic security, and quality of life, they are impacted by race, gender expression, age, ability, criminal record, where you live, and how much money you make. So in answer to that, if ever there was a time when we need to answer those questions, if ever there was a time when we have to have something in place, somebody's in place, a party in place that will address these natural concerns that we all have in our communities, then that party is the Liberal Party, and that person would be me. I am one of those people who was not born with a silver spoon in my mouth. I am one of those people who indeed struggle through this system. I am one of those people who live in a community where many of us have had to deal with these issues and these concerns. Why you would ask these type of questions tonight is why I'm here. I am one of those. When it comes to racism, when it comes to sexism, when it comes to gender equality, when it comes to your criminal record, when it comes to where you live, when it comes to how much money you make, then all of those issues would encompass race, class, gender. If ever there was a time, then that time is now. If ever there was a time when we gotta get up and stand up for what we believe in, and I believe that you students here tonight, you have a reason for why you would ask these type of questions. You have reasons for why you would bring us here to this forum tonight. And those reasons are real, and those reasons matter. I say to you tonight that we indeed have the issues under control to a certain extent. But have we got them all the answers? No. Are we on the move? Yes. Is this province about to move in the right direction? Yes. I say to you tonight that I look forward to your questions and your comments. I look forward to addressing your questions from the moderator here, and I say to you tonight that let's move in the right direction. Right now is the time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Melinda. Joanne?
Thanks. So in terms of my own personal orientation to this question, I am a feminist social policy researcher. That's how I've spent the last 15 years of my working life. I'm also the mother of 2 children. I think that in terms of thinking about this question for me, I've been thinking a lot about a story that I've heard Gary Burrell, the leader of the Nova Scotia NDP, tell a number of times over the last couple of weeks about how when he was a child, his grandfather would talk to him about all of the amazing advances that had been made in his lifetime and how wonderful it was to be able to look at his children and think about how much better the world was going to be for them when they were adults, how much progress had been made in his lifetime and how they could look at their children and think of the progress that would be made in their lifetimes. The frustrating thing is I think that parents don't look at their children like that anymore. Parents look at their children with worry and concern, because I think that if you look at what's happened in the world over the last 10 to 15 years, I think that there have been a lot of battles that we've been losing. So I think one of the reasons that I'm really proud to be able to stand for this platform that the Nova Scotia NDP released today was because it is absolutely about beginning to start to chip away at some of these structural inequalities that we've been facing for so long. One of the biggest ones, and one of the things that I think is so exciting for me, is eliminating barriers to access to post-secondary education. Whether or not you can pursue a college or university degree should not be dependent on the economic situation you were born into. It should not be dependent on the community you live in. And I know from being on the doors over the last couple of weeks, when I say to parents, that one of the things that we're running on is eliminating tuition at the Nova Scotia Community College, the look on their faces of gratitude and hope and opportunity is why I am here and why I am doing this. We also have significant pieces in our platform about the elimination of poverty. So not reducing poverty, not addressing, we can eliminate poverty in a province like Nova Scotia. That means making sure that everybody in the province can buy their food from a grocery store or a market rather than going to a food bank. It means that we can make sure that people who are working have enough money to buy food and pay their rent. And over the next couple of days, you're also going to hear some announcements about significant investments in childcare, which is another one of those structural barriers that women in particular have faced in terms of being able to access the labor market, access employment opportunities, and be able to make their lives and the lives of their children better. Thanks.
Tim.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Tim, and I'm from Dartmouth East. I'm the PC candidate in that constituency. Besides being a candidate in this election, I'm a teacher, and I've spent 13 years in the classroom. And many of the structural inequalities, I've witnessed these things occur in the hallways of the school that I teach in the classroom in which that I've worked in for 13 years. And for me, my Nova Scotia needs to be as inclusive and accepting and fair as it can possibly be. As a teacher, when I go to help a young Nova Scotian access mental health services, only to be told that it'll take up to 6 months, and I know that young Nova Scotian is in crisis, that is bad public policy. We can do so much better. Oftentimes, the things that we are talking about when it comes to structural inequalities, we need to take a long plan, a long-term vision to address these. In school, often I see many students who through no fault of their own, there's a clear achievement gap. We need to have the necessary resources in place in our schools to address those achievement gaps, to ensure that every Nova Scotian has equality of opportunity so that they can rise to their full potential. You know, just last week in Sydney Mines, 600 Nova Scotians came out to a town hall because they cannot access a primary family physician or a nurse practitioner. That is profoundly unfair. And at the doorsteps in my community of Dartmouth East, I'm hearing that time and time again, that it's often those that need those services, that need to get timely access to those services, that they're not able to do that. I want to make those things a priority. A PC government wants to make those services a priority. As I said, I've spent quite some time in the classroom, and I have a great concern about the direction of the province. You know, Melinda mentioned that the Liberals have things under control. I think certainly for those who deliver primary services in this great province of ours, they'd say otherwise, whether it's nurses or teachers. Thank you.
Thank you all for that first round and for keeping on time. The first question. Right now, almost 1 in every 7 Nova Scotians live in poverty. The support system of last resort in Nova Scotia is the Employment Support and Income Assistance Program. It does not provide enough income support, and the system itself is broken. It robs recipients of their dignity. It ensures that those in need receive the bare minimal amount of support, while expecting them to produce mounds of evidence. It forces people to rely on charities, indeed, to meet their basic needs. If elected, will your party develop and implement a comprehensive poverty reduction strategy that transforms income assistance and includes immediate and progressive increases to bring rates up to the point where no one on income assistance lives in poverty? Each of you will be given 2 minutes, and we'll start with you, Melinda.
Child poverty rate is 22.5% in Nova Scotia. It's 40% higher than Canada's child poverty rate of 18.5%. It's higher than the rest of Atlantic Canada. It's real. Poverty is real. The child poverty rate in Atlantic Canada is astounding. I've taught in the schools. I live in the community. I can go right down the street and up the street and see child poverty. This government is committed to helping Nova Scotians who need it most, to improving access to employment, to childcare, to early childhood education, to affordable housing. This government is committed to helping to break the cycle of poverty. And the word is transformation. Now, we know there is always more work to be done. We continue to work to make improvements. This government, my government, me, I'm committed to supporting families who are in need. This is no joke. This is no time to play. This is no time for rhetoric. This is no time to play. This is no time to say what they might want to hear. You may be talking about what you've witnessed, but I can tell you about what I've experienced. So it's real. The government has increased income assistance personal allowance. With federal government, we've invested an additional $70 million in affordable housing. We're working with our partners to expand school breakfast programs. We're expanding the child tax benefit to 1,300 more families.
Thank you, Melinda.
And then the next time, I'll give you a little bit more.
Thank you. Joanne?
All right. It is a bit difficult while I appreciate that Ms. Daye has not been part of the Liberal government that's been in power for the last 4 years, that government froze IA rates for 2 years of those 3.5, and then gave everyone a $20 increase last year. Has spent millions of dollars, I think we're up to about $7 million on the transformation process, none of which has reached recipients of income assistance. And we have seen in Nova Scotia over the last 3.5 years, our food bank use has grown faster than any other province in the country. So we have 7,500 more people today using food banks than we did when the Liberal government came to power. I find it hard to feel that that's a great track record. I think that the platform that we released today is very focused on the elimination of poverty. Increasing minimum wage to $15 an hour, we know would allow families who are working to bring their families above the poverty line. About 130,000 people would benefit from that increase. We've committed in our platform to fast-tracking the transformation process, whatever that means, to make sure that people are actually going to be able to get some benefit from that. And we need to make sure the government sets income assistance rates. We also know how much things cost. So when we're setting income assistance rates, they should be matched to the cost of things like rent and food. Because if we are providing that income to people, we have a responsibility to make sure it is adequate for them to actually make those choices rather than not being able to eat if they want to keep their lights on. Thanks.
Thank you. Tim.
Thank you. We need to build opportunities for all Nova Scotians, and it is really important that a government listens to those that deliver the frontline services. I think we should let those that deliver these services, to have more autonomy. Let them make decisions on the ground. Oftentimes we micromanage those that have to deliver these core services. It is completely unacceptable that so many Nova Scotians have to rely on food banks. For the PC Party, we have a long-term plan to address these economic problems within our society, and we want to build opportunities for Nova Scotians so that they can live their life based on their needs and their wants. One of the ideas that we're putting forward for long-term growth for this province is to put vocational training back into our high schools so that students, by the time they're in grade 10 or 11, if they want to choose that path, a path that will pay them very well, that they'll have that opportunity. One of the most eye-opening films I saw in the last year was a film by Jackie Torrance called My Week on Welfare. And it showed just the difficulty many people have in accessing and maintaining those services. I think we need to listen to those who deliver those services and work with them to define better public policy when it comes to income assistance.
Thank you, Tim. Casey.
Yes, we will implement a guaranteed livable income, bringing every Nova Scotian out of poverty. Not only will it bring them out of poverty, it will remove the stigma associated with social assistance, removing their barriers to other forms of participation in our society. On top of that, it will cut out a huge chunk of the bureaucracy in our government, saving us money and saving all of us headaches and saving the trees that we're printing out these forms and sending them to people on for some reason and then re-entering them in computer systems even though they were in the computer to begin. Let's cut the bureaucracy. But more than that, social assistance isn't enough because it doesn't address the root causes of poverty. And for that, we need to address things like Tim said here, like skills training. I think vocational schools are a great idea. I think there's a perfectly beautiful model of that in Quebec. They have a CEGIP program which is free and gives people university or college credits and also trains them to participate in the workforce. Why aren't we using it? Why aren't we borrowing these ideas that already work from other places? Medicine Hat, through a Housing First initiative, just eliminated homelessness. It's frustrating to see all these things that we could and should be doing, but we're still having the same old conversation about funding our bureaucratic apparatus or cutting our bureaucratic apparatus. Let's do something different. The time is for transformation. So let's transform.
Thank you, Casey. Just a reminder, if you could turn off the ringers on your cell phones. Next question, Joanne will...
Just a moment, I want to turn off my
Oh,
ring.
okay. The next question will be answered first by Joanne. The state of affordable housing is in crisis across the province. Data from the Halifax metropolitan area shows us that 25.4% of all households spend 30% or more of their household income on housing. And actually 1 out of 8 households have housing costs that eat up 50% or more of their entire income. Current legislation states that as long as landlords give the appropriate notice, rent can be raised without a limit. And across the province, there is a chronic lack of public and not-for-profit housing. Will your party introduce a rent cap to help regulate the housing market? And will it ensure affordable, safe, and healthy homes available to all? You have 2 minutes. Joanne.
So affordable housing is a priority for the Nova Scotia NDP. In May of 2013, towards the end of the NDP government, we introduced the province's first affordable housing strategy with an investment of $500 million over the next 10 years. What we saw after the election in 2013 was that the Liberal government didn't spend the money that was budgeted for affordable housing. They underspent both on capital funding, on rent supplements, and on the housing strategy itself, even though there are close to 5,000 people on the affordable housing wait list. So part of the casualty of this balanced budget is that money was left on the table rather than using it to actually support the people who needed it the most. We put forward legislation in the fall to enshrine housing as a human right as part of the Human Rights Code in Nova Scotia, to ensure that people having access to safe and secure housing would be something that would be actionable under the Human Rights Code. In our platform that was released today, we have included a commitment to invest in new units of affordable housing, to ensure that repairs and maintenance are up to date in affordable housing units that exist in the province, and to look at other areas where housing can be made more accessible to people. Here in Halifax, we have the Housing Support Worker Program, which was started under the NDP government, which was very successful as a pilot. That's been evaluated and shown to have a positive impact on access to housing for people who are at risk of homelessness. So looking at that as an option to expand throughout the province is where we can go with that.
Thank you, Joanne. Tim?
Thank you. The greatest thing we can do with regards to affordable housing is to build a strong economy in Nova Scotia. As I said before, the greatest thing is for opportunities for Nova Scotians to get good paying jobs that allows them to maximize their spending ability. We need to develop a long-term strategy that will look at this issue, but from our perspective, everything flows from a strong economy. And not only that, we have to also have a conversation about the cost of living in this province. Right now, the power rates in this province are very high. Taxes are very high. So one of the great ways in which we can put money back into the pockets of Nova Scotians is to reduce taxes for low income and medium income Nova Scotians. And that's certainly a direction we intend on going in. To live in an affordable home, a comfortable home, is about dignity. And we want to ensure Nova Scotians have access to that. But the root cause of it, to get right to the root cause of it, We need to make sure Nova Scotians have as many economic opportunities as they possibly can. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Casey.
I think Tim's right that in the long term, growing the economy is the solution, and providing people with meaningful, well-paid, skilled jobs is a solution. But in the short term, that doesn't do anything for people who are being driven out of their homes by increasing rents. And honestly, I think a rent cap, straight up, is a bad idea. We've seen it fail before, and it causes lots of problems. But an option worth exploring is putting a cap on the amount that people can increase their rent by year after year. Maybe that's what you suggested. I'm not sure. But more than that, it's just unacceptable that we have people without homes and losing their homes. We need a provincial housing first strategy. Not only is it unacceptable, it actually prevents people from accessing the political system. Yes, you can swear an oath. It's hard. It's really hard. You've got to find a supervisor at your election poll. Mostly you have to have an address to do anything. And so we need to give housing to everybody.
Thank you, Casey. Good. Melinda.
Contrary to what my NDP colleague has said, I may have but 4 years in your mind, but no, there's far more than with the Liberal Party than that. When you're looking for somebody to represent you, to represent that party, to represent that particular community, you need someone with the sincere, good leadership. You need someone who has knowledge and understanding and integrity, which is why the NDP party would come looking for me to be their candidate. No, it would not be the NDP party that I could be the candidate for. When the NDP party, under the NDP party, the number of low-income hosts increased. The NDP party refused to invest millions of federal dollars into housing. The NDP refused to act. We enacted the inquiry into the home for colored children. We worked with the Preston residents to fix the land deeds and the issues. We reinvested $65 million that the NDP cut from the classrooms, allowing for class caps in elementary schools. When it comes to housing, we reinvested $42 million federal dollars into housing. We signed a cost-matched $75 million agreement with Trudeau government to invest in maintenance and renovation. When it comes to public housing, I know what I'm talking about. I don't know if my colleagues are walking the streets of Uniacke Square and Demetrius Lane and Mulgrave Park. I am. And I can tell you right here that Mulgrave Park well appreciate what we have done as a government. Long overdue, but they have well appreciate what happened in terms of public housing, public monies into public housing, money into public housing.
Thank you, Melinda.
Mm-hmm. I can say more.
Thank you. I just want to clarify that I'm more of a host this evening than a moderator, given the time constraints. Otherwise, I might come back to some of you and ask you to actually answer some of these questions. I know. Respectfully, community organizations have spent time and have crafted these questions because they want answers, sometimes very specific answers to questions, and I really do appreciate that you are bringing what you can to this debate as representatives of your parties, and we do appreciate that, but know that I'm not coming back to you because of the time constraints, and I do appreciate if you can please answer the question as specifically as possible. The next question will begin the round with Tim. Many queer and trans Nova Scotians struggle being out or coming out in the workplace. As the result of systematic transphobia and homophobia, queer and trans individuals are more likely to be working precarious employment and oftentimes find themselves with reduced hours or a loss of employment after coming out or being outed by coworkers. What is your party's plan to increase employment equity for lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, queer, questioning, intersex, asexual, two-spirit plus?
Thank you for the question.
Individuals who are particularly, sorry, Tim, and particularly for non-binary and trans folks. Sorry, go ahead, Tim.
All right, thank you very much. As a teacher, I have seen in the hallways of schools, the hostility that still exists. And I know many of my colleagues and myself, we've always tried to address that. In my own humble way, I feel I've tried to promote acceptance and love, but we still have a long way to go. There's no doubt about that. And the PC Party recognizes that. The PC Party recognizes that the way to build an inclusive, accepting society, we need to have open conversations about human sexuality and human identity. And it's the position of this party that the best place to do that is in school, to talk to our children about diversity, the diversity that exists in life. And I've witnessed it in the different jobs I've had in my lifetime. Yes, I would say that we've come a ways in promoting tolerance and acceptance, but I know, just stepping outside of my classroom door and hearing certain comments, that it's still prevalent within our society. And certainly this is a party that's participated in the Pride Parade and will continue to participate in the Pride Parade, and will do everything to promote public policy that promotes acceptance and love of all people. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Casey.
The truth is that this isn't a problem with a short-term solution. That what we really need is cultural change. And often that only comes with generations, with generational change. And that means that we need to reform our education system so that kids are learning inclusivity and so that we're actually addressing the hate that's coming from their homes, because that's where the hate comes from. But on the political side of things, we need to be doing a better job of ensuring that our labor code, for instance, covers these cases where people are being discriminated at work, that labor complaints are accessible, that people feel comfortable coming forward, that it isn't a bureaucratic headache to say that, well, my boss reduced my hours because I dress like a woman. That my boss reduced my hours because, for any number of reasons, because my lover is a man. These are the things we need to be addressing. We need to make our public system accessible to people, because it's not. When I think about filing a public complaint, when I think about taking an institution to court, I say, no, that's too much work. Or, no, that's actually just going to come down on me. And that's not fair. So we need to reform our institutions, because they are decades old and they are broken.
Thank you. Melinda?
I started off saying this evening, that if ever there was a time, that time is now. And if ever there was a time for love, then that time is now. Because love is in need of love today. It's not old-fashioned. Those few simple words called compassion and care and concern and kindness, they're not outdated. We need more of it today. And I believe that with all people, if we only would show that care and concern and compassion. I believe that I'm in a party that has implemented Nova Scotia's first ever sexual violence strategy. and continually funding for initiatives to combat sexual violence. I'm in a party where a portion of university funding to universities to address sexual violence on campus is necessary and is going to be implemented. I'm in a party where transgender, we changed the legislation. I represented the Halifax Regional School Board where we implemented transgender policies, where we remember our students, all students in our boards, where we remember particularly our transgender students with love, care, compassion, and everything that they would need to be successful students. Transgender Nova Scotians can identify their preferred gender on their birth certificates. We became the first province in Canada to set guidelines for inclusion and support of transgender Nova Scotians in the public service. We did just that.
Thank you, Melinda. Joanne.
I think the question being specifically about employment opportunities is a challenging one because as a government, the role that we play is very much one about enforcing the guidelines and enforcing what would be covered under the Human Rights Act. So having your hours or your job changed because of how you identify is not, in fact, legal. But one of the challenges is that the process that we have right now is complaint-driven. So that requires the individual themselves to come forward and bring a complaint against their employer, which is certainly a huge challenge and more than most people would want to take on. I think as a government we can do more to ensure that employers are educated about what they are and are not allowed to do, that employees are aware of what their rights are, so that when their rights are violated, perhaps the process is a little clearer and that process is easier to navigate. We put forward a commitment to remove gender markers from provincial identification, so health cards and driver's licenses, as we don't feel it's a necessary piece of information for you to provide in order to show that you can drive a car. I think that there's a lot of work to do, but I do think that in terms of the employment question, it has to be one around educating both employers and employees about their roles and responsibilities.
Thank you, Joanne. The next question, Casey, you will begin the answer for this. 1 in 10 Nova Scotians do not have access to a family doctor or a primary care nurse. In 2015-2016, emergency rooms in the province were closed for the equivalent of 938 days. In short, many Nova Scotians cannot access the health care they need when they need it. These problems have been getting worse, not better. But while many Nova Scotians struggle to access timely, high quality, and compassionate public health care in their communities, some Nova Scotians are struggling more than others. Research has shown us that the health of individuals and communities is directly connected to social and economic determinants: race, class, gender, sexuality, income, and where they live. What do you believe has caused access to health care to be so uneven in this province? What will your party do to make sure that all Nova Scotians have access, equal access, to the services that they need in their communities?
Why has access become so uneven? It's because access to everything is becoming more and more uneven. Income inequality is growing, and with a greater income comes, well, a vote for most people. And when you vote, you catch the eye of politicians like us. And that's why people in higher income areas generally have better services. And that's just absurd. It's just wrong. So one thing we can do is to redistribute income. For one thing, nobody who is making less than the poverty line should be taxed. This is crazy. Another thing we can do is we can tax carbon and we can redistribute income that way. This is called a tax and dividend policy. And not only does it address income inequality, it addresses environmental issues and issues of environmental racism. We don't have to just tax carbon. We can actually internalize all of our externalities. We can put taxes on disposable plastic crap because it costs us so much to put it into landfills. But in terms of medical care in particular, we need new options. The fact that we're centralizing all of our services in these hospitals doesn't make any sense. We want people that know you. Like, I don't want to see a doctor, actually. I go to a doctor as a last resort because my doctor doesn't know me. And so we need, like everyone is saying, community collaborative care facilities, and not just doctors, but all sorts of medical practitioners. And we need to up our training of these practitioners.
Thank you, Casey. Melinda?
I'm glad that you said that because we need to update our training. That's just the thing that the government is indeed doing. Healthcare. 75 collaborative care centers with teams going out each day, so Nova Scotians can get the treatment in their communities. Here in the north end of Halifax, we work with the North End Community Health Center Board and their executive director to provide a new modern-day facility and more stable funding. Where is that? In North End Halifax. For who? Some of society's most vulnerable people. We are the only party with a real plan to replace the Victoria General. A new community outreach center in Bears Lake, major expansion of the Halifax Infirmary and the IWK Hospital for Children. We have mental health support. A no door is the wrong door approach. We need supports. We need supports of all mechanisms. We need to be there in the system working for the expansion of crisis services. Things like Schools Plus, things like working with our doctors, getting these clinics in places where they matter, where society's most vulnerable situations happen. The time has come to transform and redesign, to look at them from the perspective of the people who use them. I'll say that again. Look at them from the perspective of the people who use them. Thank you.
Thank you. Joanne?
Okay, so in the 2013 election, Nova Scotians were promised that every Nova Scotian would have a doctor. Today, 106,000 Nova Scotians do not have a doctor. Collaborative care centers investments have been made in this current budget, but in the last 3.5 years, the Liberal government has opened none of these. The North End Community Health Center, like other community health centers in the province, receives no consistent funding from the provincial government. There has been some funding put in place to deal with the roof that was about to fall in. So why are we seeing increasing inequity in access to medical care? Because when there's a shortage, you see people gaming the system. When there are wait lists, you see people who know a doctor or know a guy who knows a guy moving up on the wait list, whereas people who don't have those connections and don't have that ability to make those calls for themselves get left behind. When you see centralization of services like hospitals put in out in Bayers Lake where there's no access via transit, we see people not being able to access the care that they need. If you don't have a car, if you rely on public transportation, you're not going to be able to get there. As we have seen practices closing in small rural communities and them not being able to get billing numbers issued for them to bring in a new doctor, that's how you're losing services, and that's how you're seeing the people who can't move out of those communities not be able to access that. it is very important to have those relationships with primary care providers, and that's why the NDP has said that we will put $30 million a year into building community health practices with doctors and nurses based on community needs, working with communities rather than a centralized health bureaucracy.
Thank you.
Our healthcare system is in crisis. The wait times are outrageous. In Dartmouth, there are 20,000 people without a family doctor. 20,000. In Dartmouth East, we have a lot of walk-in clinics. When I look at those walk-in clinics, that reminds me of the short-term public policy we've had in place. So we've gotten to this situation because we haven't thought long-term. We need a long-term plan to address the healthcare wait times and the doctor shortage. Let me say this, though. The quality of care from our doctors and nurses are phenomenal. So I want to distinguish first the difference between the quality of care, the delivery of service, which my family knows firsthand. It's amazing. But the wait times are outrageous. I mean, if you look, for example, the average wait time for hip and knee replacements in Canada is 182 days. Here in Nova Scotia, it's 606 days. And many of us in this room probably know someone that's had to wait a long time to get the surgery. In Sydney Mines last week, doctors were talking about how, in some cases, the wait time...
While facilities are struggling to provide quality service to residents. If elected, what will your party do to not only reverse recent cuts, but to ensure that long-term care facilities have the funding they need to serve healthy meals, hire and retain qualified staff, and provide compassionate care for residents? Melinda?
An accessible Nova Scotia is good for everyone. We want Nova Scotia to be a province where everyone can live, work, learn, and play. That is, in an environment that is inclusive, welcoming, and fulfilling. We've been very happy to help communities improve accessibility. The Community Access Ability Grants, and we are excited to be able to increase the budget for this most important initiative by $800,000. We also know there are small businesses who want to be accessible, but these businesses struggle with the costs. Therefore, we want to help. That's why we're expanding $1 million in grants to small businesses. This, in combination with our accessibility legislation, will help in making the province more welcoming for everyone. The government of Nova Scotia has introduced Bill 59. That's accessibility legislation. This happened in the fall of 2016 to make Nova Scotia a province that is more inclusive and more accessible. The legislation will serve as a framework enabling the creation of accessibility standards over time. In order to further improve accessibility, our government is committing an additional $100 million in 17-18 through to 2017 to 2018 to assist existing small businesses become even more accessible. The government is also increasing the Community Access Ability Program. Thank you.
Thank you, Melinda. Joanne?
So I don't think anybody will be shocked to learn that in Nova Scotia we have a significant number of seniors, and that number of people who are over 65 grows every day. We need to make sure that adequate care with a high quality of living, high quality of care, and a certain amount of dignity is available to those people when they can no longer live in their own homes. Over the last 3.5 years, the Liberal government has cut $8.3 million from nursing homes, while the wait lists have gotten longer. In some areas of the province, the wait to get a long-term care bed is over 1,000 days. So one of the ways that we actually get people off the long-term care wait lists in this province is that they die before they enter long-term care. The current government hasn't opened any new long-term care beds, and clearly there's an urgent need to do that. So the Nova Scotia NDP has committed to restoring the funding that was cut in the last 2 budgets, because we have seen an impact on recreational programming, on food quality in those nursing homes. That lack of long-term care puts pressure on hospitals as people have to stay in hospital beds longer, and it also puts pressure on families, and particularly women, who often find themselves responsible for doing a lot of unpaid care in their own homes or in the homes of their family members. I know that we can actually increase the number of long-term care beds, and that's one of the things that's needed in order to be able to deal with the wait list crisis. We have committed $60 million to invest in long-term care over the next 4 years because we know that we need to deal with that bottleneck in the system that currently exists.
Thank you. Tim?
The last 4 years have been disrespectful to our seniors. To think that in many homes, seniors are living off a budget of $5 a day, to me that's profoundly wrong. That's not the Nova Scotia I grew up in, and that's not the Nova Scotia I want my children to grow up in. A PC government will release the next stage of the continuing care strategy. We'll work to ensure seniors have comprehensive access to senior care and high-quality long-term facilities. Yes, this government cut $8.3 million. Completely unacceptable. We do, as has been stated, we do have the highest ratio of seniors to children. So we need to take a long-term strategy. And the PC party is putting forward the notion of a continuing care strategy, so that we work in consultation to develop a strategy that gives the dignity and access seniors deserve. Thank you.
Thank you. Casey?
Well, I mean, in the short term, the answer is clearly we just need to fund beds. In the long term, I think it's pretty clear to me, and maybe some people like being shuttled off into long-term care facilities, but I think that we need to move towards a decentralized model of long-term care and keep people in their homes as long as possible and with their families and in their communities and engaged. And so we need to be directly incentivizing small community-based care facilities. And I think not only is that a benefit to our system, because it will be cheaper in the long run, it's a benefit to the seniors that are moving to these homes. It's a benefit to their intellectual health. Studies show that seniors that are still involved and active in their communities live longer, have stronger mental health into their old age, and don't suffer from Alzheimer's and mental illness. And they have support. And they have an intergenerational dialogue, which is so important. When we put everybody of one generation in one place, we lose our ability to relate with each other. And honestly, that's why we're in the situation we're in now, at least partially, that we're not talking to each other. We're just reading our books.
Thank you. The next round of the next question will begin with Joanne. Many advocates have applauded the introduction of a mental health court in Nova Scotia. However, this mental health court program is limited in its ability to be successful because of our chronically underfunded mental health care system. The Mental Health Court requires participants to actively work toward recovery and access mental health care services. However, in many cases, these services are limited and subject to extensive wait lists. Additionally, mental health programs inside the prison system are limited, and offenders struggle to receive the quality and number of counseling sessions necessary to recover from serious mental illness and the effects of trauma. Please outline your party's plan to improve community-based mental health care services to ensure that the mental health court can function effectively, be expanded, and explain how you will improve access to counseling services inside provincial correctional facilities. Joanne.
So in terms of our plans for mental health, we want to double the initial investment in the mental health and addiction strategy in order to cut wait times to half. We know that the wait times as they currently exist are far too high. In order to reduce them, you need to hire more people to provide those services. We would also like to open 3 hub mental health emergency departments so that people who are in mental health crisis are not they can still enter through our emergency departments that they exist now, but that they can be kind of screened out into a more appropriate environment for someone who's having mental health crisis, so that people who are coming from an accident and people who are having severe panic attacks are not in the same place together, and they're accessing appropriate services. We need to make sure that when people enter the hospital in crisis, that then they are able to immediately connect to community-based care. We're also committing to reversing the $600,000 in cuts to community organizations that provide this sort of support. So there are a lot of community organizations that provide peer support or provide other supports in community. Those organizations had their grant funding cut in the last 2 years. We want to restore that funding so that they can continue to do that work and invest an additional $150,000 to ensure that people have access to those sorts of supports.
Thank you, Joanne. Tim?
This is a very important question. I believe access to mental health services are the healthcare crisis of our time. For the last 5 years, I've worked as a go-to person with the Halifax Regional School Board. And many go-to teachers were trained by Dr. Stan Kutcher, and it was excellent training. However, I've seen in our schools, I've seen among our youth, the desire to talk about mental health, and that's a good thing. In the span of my career, when I started, no one talked about mental health. And then we encouraged our youth to talk about mental health. But then the services aren't there. The average wait time is 6 months. The PC Party, PC government, will make access to mental health services a priority. We'll achieve that through the Healthier Schools Act by placing mental health professionals in all our schools to ensure that if a young person is experiencing difficulty, they get the help and professional support they require. Not only that, we will also establish mental health emergency first aid, so that no longer would you have to go to the Dartmouth General or the Halifax Infirmary. There would be specific sites for a person to go to. Along with the professionals assigned to schools, we would ensure teachers in this province receive mental health literacy training, and it would be for all teachers. To ensure that teachers are aware of the signs and are able to direct them to the professional supports that will be based within our school system. And also, we will establish a Center for Mental Health Studies here in Nova Scotia so that Nova Scotia becomes a leader in mental health studies. Thank you.
Casey?
I agree with both Joanne and Tim. We need to get mental health services into our schools, and we need to have community-based care access. We also need to explore different models for treating mental health. And in the long term, we need to be addressing the root causes. Because the truth is that mental health problems are on the rise. And that's because of the way that we organize our society. It's because we're constantly stressed out, we're working 40 hours a week, we're living in poverty, we don't know how to make ends meet. We're constantly worrying about things. And yeah, that can drive you. So what we need is, yeah, I think a research facility is a great idea. But when somebody says research facility, what does that mean? Is that going to end up with work on the ground, with experimental facilities that are, for instance, bringing people with mental health challenges into the outdoors to see if that can have an effect on their problems? Or can we bring them together to discuss it? Can we bring them in a place that's not clinical, that's not sterile? Can we give them an opportunity to re-grasp a joie de vivre? Because we're all losing that. And with that goes our mental health.
Thank you. Melinda?
Thank you. One of the most sensitive issues on the hearts and minds of Nova Scotians, of Canadians today, is the issue of mental health. I don't think there's any family that hasn't been affected by it. Having been a high school teacher and principal, having served with the Halifax Regional School Board as their chair for the past 4 years prior to coming to the campaign for MLA, and also from a personal standpoint, mental health, very high on our priority. The government is committed to working with educational partners, with community services, with the Department of Justice. We are in a crisis. We can't get away from that. The most important thing that we can do is continue with those mental health outpatient centers that we need. One of the things that we need more of is the community-based care centers. One of the things that we need to do more of is listen to the experts, work with the experts. Dr. Stan Kuchar has been working in our schools with our students, working with our school boards, working with community services, Department of Justice. It's not about party lines. It's about working with people who know how best to advise us when it comes to mental health. From a teacher perspective, I can tell you, if ever, again, that's my phrase, if ever there was a time, then that time is now. When you look at our situation in our high schools and in our universities, in our homes, in our communities, then we need all the help that we can get. And we are in the midst of getting that help right here in Nova Scotia now. Let's continue the path that we're on. It's a very important path, and it's not about party lines.
Thank you. Tim, you will begin the answers to this question. Cuts to public funding have damaged the integrity and sustainability of Nova Scotia's post-secondary education system. As public funding has decreased, tuition fees have skyrocketed, limiting access to higher education. Decreases of 10% from university operating grants from 2010 to 2013 have been replaced with modest 1% increases, which means universities are underfunded by over $22 million before inflation. Our province is home to the second highest tuition fees in Canada, and the enrollment rate of Nova Scotians enrolled in our universities is declining. Catastrophic student debt loads are forcing students to leave the province, and previous attempts to keep them here, such as the graduate retention rebate, have failed. How much will your party increase public funding for post-secondary institutions, and what is your plan to regulate and eliminate tuition fees?
Thank you for the question. It's a very, very important question. At the high school I teach at, we have a tradition during our graduation ceremony. The Master of Ceremony will often read out the plan of the graduate. And year after year, I see fewer and fewer students indicating that they are going on to post-secondary education, whether it's NSCC or university. I'm often hearing more and more students are going to take a year off. And that is a clear reflection on the fact that here in Nova Scotia, we have the second highest tuition rates in the country. It's completely unacceptable. Cost should not be a barrier to opportunities. And certainly, as a teacher, to see a student not even contemplate post-secondary studies because of the obstacle of tuition. I find that to be outrageous, and it is a public policy failure. It is the position of the PC party that one of the things we want to do in the short term is see Nova Scotia tuition at the university level come down to the national average. And we'll achieve that by signing a memorandum of understanding with our post-secondary institutions to work with them to bring the tuition fees down. It is a major problem for our youth in this province. Certainly as someone who aspires to serve the public in this capacity, this is something that I hold dear to my heart and want to fight for, because I've seen many of my students have to take a year or 2 or 3 years off in order to save up and go to college or university. So the PC party wants to work with our universities to bring tuition down to the national average, and it's a key priority of a future PC government. Thank you.
Thank you. Casey.
In the short term, well, there are some things we can do immediately. We can immediately lower tuition to the pre-McNeil levels. We can immediately convert all of our provincial loans to grants. In the long term, the Green Party and myself are committed to universal education. That means either free or so cheap that everyone can get a grant to get into it. But we could also look at more innovative strategies, or not so innovative, depending on how you look at it. Like I was talking about earlier, Quebec has a very viable program in CEGEP, and we should look at replicating it. And we should look at condensing our education system so that people are learning things quicker, because there is more to learn now than there has ever been. And one of the most important things to learn is actually how to learn. But we need to reform our primary, secondary, and maybe there's some between secondary and post-secondary education, so that we can give people the skills they need to survive in a world that is changing faster than it's ever changed before. But more than that, we need to address the structural inefficiencies in our universities. I've heard students complain about this. I've heard professors complain about this. We are wasting money on bureaucracy. And why do you think that happens? Because the bureaucrats are in charge of allocating the funds. The more funds they allocate to bureaucracy, the more the bureaucracy grows. And it's just a waste. It's just a total waste. Every university has a different Blackboard system, or a different Moodle system, or a different system for doing the same thing. Why don't we have a government information technology ministry that is coordinating our efforts so that we can slash our bureaucratic costs in half?
Thank you. Melinda?
Yes, just a moment. I was looking for my notes, just a moment. Diana Whalen defended the savings resulting from the elimination of the graduate retention rebate when she said that we're trying to make smart investments, and this one was money that was not doing what the credit said, and that is retaining our young people. The government will focus instead on programs aimed at helping graduates enter the workforce. They include a new graduate scholarship for innovation and research worth $1.85 million and a $1.6 million program aimed at helping employers train new graduate workers. If ever there was a time, and those words are real, then that time is certainly now. The university students want to stay in the province. Our Nova Scotian, we have all these wonderful university programs in our province, and yet we struggle with education. Let's keep our universities and our students here in the province where they would want to be. Let's keep the student loan where you have asked it to be. Those are my comments.
Thank you. Joanne?
So there was a time when a high school education was enough to be able to get a job. When finishing grade 12 qualified you to be able to get an entry-level position, and you could work from there. That's not the case anymore. We all know that some level of post-secondary education is required to enter most jobs at this point, and it is not reasonable that those opportunities should be closed to someone because of the situation that they're born into. That's why the Nova Scotia NDP has committed to making access to Nova Scotia Community College free for all students, starting in September when the NDP forms government, with a commitment that over 4 years we would reduce university tuition by 10%, with the goal of moving in the same direction. Post-secondary education shouldn't be limited by your financial ability to pay, and that includes your financial ability to take on debt. Here in Nova Scotia, we have not only the highest tuition rates in Canada, we also have the highest level of student indebtedness upon graduation. And it's fine to say that some of those loans may be turned into grants, but you are still taking out those loans and crossing your fingers and hoping the government doesn't change its mind again. It is not reasonable to expect students to take on tens of thousands of dollars in debt for what is the entry requirement to most reasonable employment in the province. So free university is coming, but free college is now.
Thank you. Casey, you will begin this round. Nova Scotian families deserve a strong public education system. The recent labor dispute with Nova Scotia teachers brought to light the challenges currently facing primary and secondary education, such as large class sizes, split classes, and lack of adequate supports for students with special needs and who require mental health support. What does your party intend to do to address these issues? What funding is attached to these promises, and who will have a say in how these initiatives are designed and implemented?
For starters, we can repeal the illegal Bill 75 and negotiate in good faith with not just teachers, but everybody. Not only is it illegal, it's just sort of awful. And we can increase our funding, and we need to reduce our classroom sizes, and not to 25 students. Have you been in a classroom with 25 students? That's crazy. We need our classroom sizes to be between 10 and 20. 20 should be a maximum for any classroom. And honestly, we need to do the same things with our universities. We're churning students out like they're plastic bottles instead of educating them. And it's just the future that we're giving up. And we've got to stop ignoring the future because people are going to die. And we need the innovation that well-educated citizens can bring to our society, or people are going to die. It's just the future. Let's stop ignoring it.
Thank you. Melinda?
School enrollment is numbers are low. The school enrollments are not high. Having taught school for 36 years in this province, having taught school for 36 years in the Halifax Regional School Board, we do not have classes that are way over the top. There's 25 to 27 students in a class. We have students in our classrooms anywhere between 19 and 20, 21. especially in our priority schools. The odd time you will get 20, 22, maybe 23. The teacher and the principal sit together and determine the class size of your students. The teacher and the principal. I sat with mine many years. I have the experience. I'm not sitting here playing games, and this is not something that we want to laugh and joke about. It's real. Our class sizes are not over the top. Our enrollment, families are not as high as they once were. I came up in a family of 9 children. We don't have a lot of that today. Families have 1, 2, maybe 3. The odd time we'll get somebody with a family of 6 children today. There are times when we have split classes, but we don't have that today. But if ever there was that time, it is now that we need to be thinking about the priority schools. Do you understand what priority schools are? Perhaps you'll ask that question later on. What do I mean by priority schools? My time is up right now. But if you really want to be serious about education, then ask me about education and ask me about who's in our schools and who's teaching our kids and why they're teaching our kids and who wants to teach our kids. Ask the questions, ask the serious questions.
Joanne?
So we have
Not a
been
joke.
very clear about our commitment on education. We've committed to repealing Bill 75 and trying to repair the damaged relationship with teachers, sitting down to have a meaningful negotiation with them about their contract and address the concerns that they had raised in the previous negotiations. We have not assigned a budget line to that because we think that that's where the Liberal government got into trouble by going in with their requirements already laid out. We actually want to have a conversation and see what we can do. In terms of class caps, so class caps were brought into the early grades when the NDP was in government. We want to extend those all the way to grade 12. The amounts in the costing of our platform are based on the costing of the earlier grade class caps. When we're putting in class caps in place, we do want to take into consideration class composition, so we understand that if there are a number of high needs students in a classroom, that changes the way that classroom needs to look. We want to make sure that the educational specialists and other classroom supports that teachers have been crying out for are made available to them. So whether that's school psychologists or speech pathologists, to make sure that the budget is in place to be able to have those people working in the classroom. I think just based on my napkin math right here, the first year, I believe it's about $19 million that we'd be putting back into education. I think the other important piece in our education plan is the moratorium on school closures. If we want to attract people to this province, if we want people to continue to settle across the province, we can't be telling small communities that they can no longer have a school. No family is going to move into a community that doesn't have a school. We need to come up with more innovative approaches to being able to keep communities in small rural schools in small rural communities.
Tim?
Thank you. In the entire 122-year history of the Nova Scotia Teachers Union, teachers have never faced a more anti-education premier than Stephen McNeil. And I know there's teachers in this room, and the bottom line is we've lost our way when it comes to educating our youth. Education belongs to the communities. It belongs to parents. It belongs to communities who want to pass on their values. The PCs, we take a consultative approach. We know we have 9,300 experts, very good experts, day in and day out, that are in front of our kids every day, working hard to ensure that they have the best education possible. The issue in the last 10 or 15 years is we've adopted education policies that do not maximize the educational opportunities for our youth. And teachers in this province certainly expressed that in February of this year. The pressure cooker blew up, and teachers let Nova Scotians know that there are profound structural problems in our schools. So what we need to do is work together. You know, at the Law Amendments Committee, 400 teachers signed up to speak. 400, and if I recall, only 75 got the opportunity. We've just begun the conversation. The PC government will take a consultative approach, working with our teachers to design education policy that sets Nova Scotia up, not for the next 5 years, but for the next 20 or 25 years. And we have some ideas to do that. Fortunately, I don't have the time, but if you want to speak to me about that after, I'd love to speak to you about education policies. Thank you.
Second last round. Melinda, you will begin this round. Environmental issues have become familiar topics of public debate and political dialogue in Nova Scotia, but there are some environmental problems that have yet to receive substantive legislative attention. One of those problems is environmental racism, defined as a form of systemic discrimination that can be recognized in Nova Scotia in the disproportionate location of polluting industries near Mi'kmaq and African Nova Scotian communities, and also in the comparative lack of political power that those communities have to resist the siting of industrial polluters close to their homes, and the power to advocate successfully for remediation when contamination occurs. Community efforts to secure a legislative commitment to address environmental racism have not been successful. The ongoing experiences of Lincolnville, Shelburne, and Sabagani First Nation, to name just a few, demonstrate the pressing need for legislative attention to this issue. If elected, what steps will you take to ensure that environmental racism is understood, acknowledged, and addressed by the Legislative Assembly? Melinda?
Environmental racism is understood and addressed. After the NDP refused to act, the Liberal government reached an agreement and we started to clean up Boat Harbor. Environmental racism. We enacted the inquiry into the home for colored children after the NDP put up barriers and would not even talk or discuss the situation at all. We worked and continue to work with the Preston residents to fix the land deed issue. We have signaled our desire to work with Halifax regarding Harrietsville. When it comes to environmental racism, this is a party of inclusion and acceptance and awareness and making ourselves available to listen. We learned, and we will continue to learn, what happened to Africville, what happens right now in Lincolnville, Nova Scotia, what is happening across this province in places like Harrietsville. We have instituted and will continue to maintain the moratorium on fracking so no community has to worry about adverse effects when science remains unclear. When it comes to environmental racism, it affects us personally. Environmental racism hurts to the core. It hurts our people. Mentally, physically, we have been hurt by this province continually coming up with environmental racism and having some kind of justification for it. This government says no. My time is up.
Thank you. Joanne?
So in April 2015, NDP MLA Lenore Zan brought forward Bill 111 to the House, which was an act to address environmental racism, but the Liberal government refused to debate and pass that bill. In the spring of this year, Denise Peterson-Rayfuse brought forward an environmental bill of rights, which is based on a piece of legislation that came out of Ontario that spells out the need to protect our environment, address climate change, and provide opportunities for meaningful consultation and public participation around environmental questions. I think in terms of the issue of environmental racism, this is one of the things that's often brought forward. In the case of the Alton gas issue, you know, we tend to believe communities when they say that they weren't adequately or meaningfully consulted. And we need to have more transparency in that process in order to make sure that that happens and is enshrined in some sort of legislation that makes sure that it's required to happen. The things that are needed in order to be able to address this problem, which has existed in Nova Scotia and in other jurisdictions for a long time, is that we do need those legal and legislative resources in order to be able to have some sort of framework, to have a process to be able to address them. We need financial resources, both for research and for those consultation processes, which are meaningful to those communities. But we also need political will and commitment, and I think it's those last two that have been lacking, but I think that the NDP, given the record that we have of bringing these bills forward, will have success in bringing them forward when we form government.
Tim?
Thank you. A couple of years ago, or more than 10 years ago, I took a group of French immersion students to Clare, in between Digby and Yarmouth, the French shore. And as we were driving through the Annapolis Valley, I mean, you know, everyone notices just how beautiful the landscape is. And then when you get to Digby County, you notice the landscape changes very, very differently. And this is where the majority of Acadians in our province live. About 8,500 Acadians live there. And I remember a student asking me, so what happened to the Acadians? And I said, well, this province has a history of environmental racism. And we see that. It has to be acknowledged. It has to be discussed in our curriculum. It's there somewhat, but we need to have a more open and honest discussion about this in our province, because it's striking. And many of you I know in this room, your eyes are opened. You know it, we know it. So there has to be consultation. There has to be an ongoing discussion. There's, as Joanne said, there has to be the political will to ensure that communities are consulted with in a respectful way to ensure that these things don't happen in the future. Thank you.
Casey?
The Green Party abides in all things by the precautionary principle. That means that if you don't know what something is going to do, or if something is irreversible, you just don't do it. Dumping tons of salt into our rivers. Don't do it. We would stop Alton gas. We would ban fracking. We would ban the spraying of glyphosate. Moreover, we have laws on the books that are simply unenforced. For instance, you're not allowed to dump your septic into a body of water. And yet there are thousands of houses that are grandfathered in and do just that. And even if that house is sold, there's no requirement for that system to be upgraded. There's no requirement for a proper septic system to be put in place. This is a no-brainer. Why aren't we enforcing the legislation that we have? And when it comes to consultation with First Nations in particular, I think all of these other candidates have it wrong. We don't have a duty to consult. We have a duty to get their permission, because they are a sovereign entity and we are on their land.
Thank you, Casey. Joanne, you will begin this round. Despite the obvious market trends towards renewable technologies and the scientific consensus on the need to stop developing new fossil fuel resources in order to avoid the worst of what climate change could bring, Nova Scotia's governments have not invested greatly in renewable technology or job training for workers. How will your party ensure that Nova Scotia aggressively reduces greenhouse gas emissions while ensuring energy is accessible to all Nova Scotians regardless of income, and invest in a just transition to a prosperous, low-carbon economy? Joanne?
So we think that the approach that we need to take is to start leading the country in clean energy generation and setting hard targets, making sustainable power a priority. The reason that Nova Scotia is actually kind of ahead of the game on carbon emissions is because of the targets that we put in place when we were in government. We want to work towards creating a carbon neutral government. So looking at the government organization as a whole and working to reduce our own carbon footprint so that it's actually a carbon neutral enterprise. We want to establish new programs to encourage renewable energy generation and invest in sustainable transportation, including core funding for public transportation. The Environmental Bill of Rights is a key part of our platform to ensure that every action that's being taken by the government has the opportunity to go through that consultation process, and to establish an independent environmental commissioner to enforce the bill's provisions. Our plan for fighting climate change is by legislating a hard target for greenhouse gas emissions reductions for 2030, but within the first year of our mandate. Thanks.
Thanks. Tim?
Thank you. The PC party believes that there should be balance between responsible, sustainable development and economic growth. We do not support new taxes or new penalties on ordinary Nova Scotians. We have a different approach in terms of environmental sustainability. We believe that it's the big polluters that should pay here in Nova Scotia with regards to emissions. The PC party is committing to a Clean Air Act, which lays out detailed requirements for maintaining air quality in Nova Scotia and places responsibility on the polluter rather than on individual Nova Scotians through a carbon tax. We will also renew a bill that was passed by a previous PC government known as the Environmental Goals and Sustainable Prosperity Act. And this will set Nova Scotia on a path to achieving clear emission targets. So the bottom line is, when we talk about carbon pricing, carbon taxes, we believe this is going to increase the cost of living in Nova Scotia. It would add nearly 7 cents per liter to the price of gasoline at the pumps in Nova Scotia. It would also increase electricity bills by 1.8% per kilowatt. And of course, based on household consumption of 3,000 liters of gasoline, 100,000 kilowatts, and 2,500 liters of heating oil, that adds up to an annual cost per household of $612 per year. To summarize, we believe it's the big polluters that should pay, and not Nova Scotians. Thank you.
Thank you. Casey?
How much will it cost when extreme weather events sweep through our province, not a few times a year, but every week? How much will it cost when our power goes out, when we're cut off from our supplies, and we have 3 days of food left in this province because we have no food security, because we have no energy security? How much will that cost? Because it's coming, and it's not coming in centuries. It's coming in decades. How long does a provincial government rule? Half a decade. We have 4 governments to address these challenges. 4 governments. We need a carbon tax now, not cap and trade. What did I say earlier about bureaucrats creating more bureaucracy? And we need to ensure that that carbon tax doesn't impact low-income Nova Scotians adversely by giving it back to them through a dividend system. This will address so many of our problems in one swoop. It addresses our environmental problems. It addresses our problems of rising inequality. It's just common sense. And not only that, the business community is on board. They just want a plan. They want to see a plan so that they can prepare. And if we give them a plan, if we tell them this is how things are going to go up, then they are going to innovate. And the truth is that Tim's wrong and the PC party is wrong. It's not a balance between a sustainable economy and a viable economy. A sustainable economy is the future. And if we don't catch up, everyone is going to leapfrog past us.
Thank you. Melinda?
The Liberal government will continue to provide national leadership and join with provinces and territories to take action on climate change, put a price on carbon, and reduce carbon pollution. Climate change is an immediate and significant threat to our communities and our economy. The previous government had nearly a decade to take action on climate change, but failed to do so. This lack of leadership tarnished Canada's reputation abroad, and it made it harder for Canadian businessmen to compete. The provinces and the territories recognize the need to act now and have already begun to price carbon and take action to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. The government will instead partner with provincial and territorial leaders to develop real climate change solutions consistent with our international obligations, that is, to protect the planet, all while growing our economy. And it is that together we will attend the Paris Climate Conference, and they did just that. And within 90 days, they formally met to establish a pan-Canadian framework for combating climate change. This government is committed to working together to establish national emissions reduction targets and to ensure that the provinces and the territories have targeted federal funding and the much-needed flexibility to design their own policies to meet these commitments, including each province's own carbon pricing policies. Thank you.
Thank you. Each candidate will now have 2 minutes for any concluding remarks, beginning with Tim.
The last 4 years have been profoundly disrespectful to Nova Scotians. Having spoken to film workers, teachers, and nurses, I truly believe the public policy that's been enacted in the last few years under the McNeil Liberals is not setting Nova Scotia up for success. We need long-term plans that set us up in education and healthcare. We need long-term plans to ensure that Nova Scotia has a strong and vibrant economy. I dream of the day when the biggest export from Nova Scotia ends. People. I want to see young people stay in Nova Scotia. I want to see Nova Scotians prosper. And the only way we can achieve that is by working together in a consultative, professional manner to ensure that we have public policy that maximizes the common good. Now, I've worked in a system that I can see where public policy has become disconnected from what's happening on the ground. My Green Party colleague, talked about bureaucracy, and I agree with him. I think we're at a point now in formation of public policy that we don't consult with those that have to execute or deliver that public policy. I'd like to be part of that conversation to make sure that when ideas are implemented, that they maximize the common good for all Nova Scotians. And I want to thank all of you for attending this evening. It's great to see so many politically engaged citizens. Thank you.
Casey.
I think Tim's right. We need serious long-term planning. And the fact is that we're not going to get that the way that our current electoral system is organized, the way that it favors parties over people, the way that it favors ideologies over ideas, the way that it favors bureaucracy over innovation. And how can we change this? It's not going to be easy. But I think what we all need to do is think about what we want from our MLAs and vote for the people who are going to give us that. Now, I'm probably not in most of your riding, But there are people who share my values, hopefully in one of your ridings. There are people who are thinking for themselves. And the number one question you should be asking your MLA is, will you toe the party line? Because our world is organized by bureaucratic organizations that have no connection with us. We need to think about the future. The future's coming. And if we don't do something about that, we're going to be washed away by it. If we do something about it, we can have justice, equity, a living income for everybody, not just in Nova Scotia, but in Canada. If we don't, we're going to fall behind. And in particular, developing nations are going to leapfrog ahead of us and make us uncompetitive.
Thank you. Melinda?
Access to public services, economic security, and quality of life are impacted by factors such as race, gender, gender expression, and so on and so forth. Yet the word race and racism was never addressed tonight. We talk about environmental racism, but there's far more to talk about than race. Besides environmental racism, the question was never raised. There is a report that was given many years ago in 1995, and that report was the Black Learners Advisory Report on Education. It represents a major effort on the part of the Black Learners Advisory Committee, and it raised a number of very important issues that must receive the full consideration of the department and the government. It did just that. The minister at the time said, "I'm struck by the thoroughness of the report and by the balanced and thoughtful approach." That was then, and it holds true today. That it outlines to address the legacy of inequity that is documented. The minister at the time said that, "I find in the Black report a disturbing portrait of a severely disadvantaged community of Black Nova Scotians. I have no doubt that, as Black suggests, this results in large measure from systemic racism and reflects the historic failure of the educational system to address the needs of the Black community." We're talking about those people in the margins tonight. We're talking about those people who are identified by race, gender, gender expression, age, sexuality, criminal record, where you live, and how much money you make. Then we have to talk about some tough subjects. We have to have the time to talk about those tough subjects, and my time is up. But I will be here afterwards, and I want to talk to you about some very serious, tough subjects in Nova Scotia. Thank you.
Joanne?
So I'm running for the Nova Scotia NDP because I truly believe that we can do an awful lot better here in Nova Scotia. I'm really proud of the platform that we released today that I believe is a truly social democratic platform that is focused on investing in people and eliminating some of those inequalities that have persisted and grown worse over the last 4 years. I think the platform that we've put forward shows that we have real choices, that with the money that we have in this province, with the resources we have in this province, we can invest in education, we can invest in healthcare, we can invest in our communities, and we can invest in an economy where everyone can get ahead, not just the few who have traditionally gotten ahead by staying at the top. I think the platform that we've put forward reflects what people are telling me when I'm knocking on their door, that they're upset about the cuts to long-term care, that they're upset about the way this government has treated teachers, that they're unhappy about the lack of opportunity that exists for young people, for their children, talking about children who have had to leave the province because of the cuts to the film tax credit, or children who have had to leave the province to be able to work and earn enough money to pay off their incredibly large student loans. I think that one of the things that's really important to remember as we're looking at the platform that we've put forward is that I don't think anybody, any of the other parties are disagreeing that these are the investments that need to be made. I think all of the arguments that we keep hearing are, we can't have nice things. So I think that what I want to say is we can have nice things. We can absolutely do this, and you just have to vote for it to get it. Thanks.
So I just want to end and thank the candidates very much, not just for participating this evening and for responding to the questions from the community organizations, but for putting yourself out there in this election. I wish you all the best for the next 15 days as you knock on doors. Thank you so much for coming this evening and for being candidates. It's really important, obviously, for our democracy to have the passion that you obviously have to do this. So thank you. Thank you. Thanks to the live streamer. Thanks especially to Chris Parsons from the Nova Scotia Health Coalition and Anna Dubinsky from the Canadian Federation of Students.
A little bit.
Good evening.
I also have a poll.